right, everybody, welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Mikasa. On this week's show, we have a guest back. That's the Mayfly Project. Jess and Caitlin have been on the show before. It was darn near 3 years ago, I think, or maybe even more. But you guys were really in the early 2000s, and it was like everybody loved your logo, but they didn't know what it was about. So about what the Mayfly Project is, we'll get everybody on the same page. Then we're going to talk about what you've been up to for the past 3 years. And when we follow that, we're going to jump into a favorite of both of you, and that's tightline nymphing. I know, Jess, you've become a proponent of this and have gone through some pretty cool scenarios to learn from some great people. And Caitlin, you've admitted to me that you've picked up a lot from Jess and really learned from him at in scenario, but he's learned some things from you too, especially in dry fly fishing. So we're going to talk a little bit about both, but primarily the tight lining. Once we get down with that, we're going to get on to another subject, and that is maintaining a connection with your tight lining or bobber nymphing, whatever it is, but being able to maintain that connection and that strike indication and how important that is in both scenarios. So we're going to talk about both of those. That's going to be pretty fun. But before we go, Caitlin, just a reminder on who you are. You work with the Mayfly Project. Jess brought you on after he founded the organization. The two of you had known each other because you worked together in Alaska in a lodge and guiding experiences, etc. But you also spent some time in conservation, in forestry work with bull trout. So you probably had some really cool things that you learned there. And then, Jess, you've been an angler since a kid. You started fly fishing, you just kind of grew up through it. But when you became an adult, you really started to grasp onto the healing aspects of fly fishing and brought that into the Mayfly Project. So I think with that said, Jess, why don't you give us a brief description of what the Mayfly Project is, and then we'll talk about, some of those other scenarios.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, Christian, for, you guys for having us back. So the Mayfly Project, we are a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and we mentor foster kids through fly fishing. So we basically will take, our foster kids through 5 sessions within a 6-month window, and we'll teach them everything they need to know about fly fishing. So we'll teach them, casting, knot tying, conservation, all of these different things. And then at the end of the project, we will outfit our kids with everything they need to fly fish on their own. So we'll give them their own fly rod, their own pack, their own flies, basically just connect them to their local ecosystems, and then outfit them so they can go out and fish on their own.
Very cool. Very cool. Do you see kids experimenting too in their local zones, like maybe trying some urban fishing or the local ponds, et cetera, where you were like, oh, I wasn't really expecting that, but they're doing it. Cool.
Yeah, so we do see that, we'll have mentors report back to us with, sights of the kids on the river, or they'll, we actually have a pond here in Arkansas that's only for our foster kids. And so, if you see kids around there, most likely they're foster
cool.
kids. So that's pretty cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And Caitlin, I think you mentioned to me before that it's hard to keep track of the kids because they're not, dedicated to a specific home, et cetera. And often you're like, you know what, it doesn't really matter to us if they continue to fish in a lot of ways because they just learn from the experience. Could you talk a little about that for us?
Yeah. So our big premise for Mayfly is to make sure that the kids are learning fly fishing because it is a great coping mechanism for them. Like, a lot of these kids are struggling with PTSD and anxiety, and just like being in foster care is stressful. So when they learn that they can go outdoors to find mental rest and take a break, that really is the priority for us. So obviously we'd love for them to continue to fly fish because we believe it's so good for them. But they do get that short-term break, that time with mentors that's so important, and just to connect to the outdoors. Like Jess said, a lot of these kids have never even experienced public lands, or they've never even been to the river. We have kids in Missoula that have never even been in the rivers there, didn't even know there are rivers, that you could go to. And it's oh man, you live in one of the best fisheries in the world. So I think getting these kids to see there are places that you can go outside of your situation to get a break is just monumental for foster kids specifically.
Do you see kids maybe not fly fishing during the day, but being participants in just their own mental health and wellness, et cetera, where you're like, they're getting a lot out of this right now?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think the coolest thing is you can see it visually as a mentor. Like the kids will show up, they'll be nervous, we'll have all the backstory of kind of where the kids have been through, what they've been through and stuff, just so we know how to work with them. And once they show up and then they're nervous and don't know who we are and stuff, but once we get into even just casting, like you visually see a change in them. So I think that's one of the most rewarding parts. And for us, as founders to see like, okay, this is actually working. Like these kids, you can physically see them calming down. You can see them trusting people. You can see them like feeling good about themselves for hitting the middle of that hula hoop with their cast. So it really, fly fishing does its thing. Like I say that all the time. Like it really is fly fishing doing the work. Like we're just there to kind of introduce them and just hold space for them so they have a place to go and learn.
Do you see quite a bit of these kids, I guess, coming back to you in a sense of like, hey, as I'm learning this throughout the day, can you teach me something else or something new, like that want to learn, et cetera, is I guess where I'm going?
Yeah, so we have all the time, like we'll have kids who come back for multiple years, and so most of the time their second year, that first year we get them their own fly rod pack, all that good stuff. But the second year we normally get them waders or fly tying stuff. Like we have some group homes that have like a fly tying kit and station right at their home so they can keep tying. So yeah, obviously kids are all different and all over the map of how involved they are, but we definitely have some kids like we had Gabe this weekend at one of our outings, and he's been through the project, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 times. And I mean, he showed up in his own waders, like with his own fly rod, like all these things, and I can't remember, I think he told me he caught like 38.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, like within like a 4 hour
got the little
span,
metal clicker,
and
he's like, yep.
Yeah, true Euro number, right? Like metal clicker, right. Getting it going. But I mean, so we definitely have some kids who are eat up with it just like we all are.
That is very cool. So how many locations are you guys servicing? You had mentioned Missoula, but you guys are in Arkansas and other places. So how many locations are you servicing?
We have about 65 locations now, and then that's also including the UK. Like we started another nonprofit in the United Kingdom with Susan Scrupa over there. Mm-hmm. She's amazing. So yeah, she's growing Mayfly project over there too. So I think this next year they're going to have 3 projects in the UK there. So yeah, kind of all over now.
Each location, do you do multiple projects at each location, or how does that work?
We do one project, but the project is 5 outings. So it takes a season to do it. So it's not just a one-time thing. Yeah, but 1 a year seems to be the great window just because of the fishing. We want to make sure it's good fishing time. And then also kids are moved in and out of foster care so often. So we want it to be something they can start and finish and not something that they miss out on.
Give me an example of what a project is. What does that mean?
Go ahead, Jess.
So a project consists of like a lead mentor and a bunch of mentors underneath them. So normally like to a 1-to-1 ratio, right? So most times we have, let's just say 8 kids, we like to have like 12 mentors, so you have a lead mentor, mentors, and then we have kids. So kids come from different places. Sometimes they come from group homes, or we use individual foster families, just kind of depending on every state is different. Every county is different, but basically you have a lead mentor, mentors, and kids, and they're working together in 5 outings within like a 6-month window, and so that's typically what a project is. So it consists of 5 outings with our mentors that are a 1-to-1 mentor to mentee ratio.
Okay. I have a quick question, and we don't have to go into real heavy detail here, but if I know a foster family, or I am a foster family, or I'm a foster home, how do I participate? And is there financial support for these kids to do that too?
Yeah, anybody can register as long as they've been through foster care, even if they're adopted. So we just ask that you look on our website at our map, and there's a section called Register to Child, and you can just register through there. We provide everything for free, so there's no cost to the families or the
Okay,
foster
very
kids at
cool.
all.
On the other hand, you probably receive quite a bit of donation and sponsorship, et cetera. So could you list off, hey, this is our website, this is how you get a hold of us, and who, why, kind of thing, and then let's make sure everybody understands that too.
Yeah, so our website is just themayflyproject.com. And we have like Kate said, we had an interactive map on there that shows our projects. You can actually donate to specific projects if you want to. So
cool.
If you're from, Alabama and you want to keep money in Alabama, like you can donate to the Alabama project, and we'll make sure those funds are allocated to that project. So, your money stays in your community. Our cost per kid is $780, and that covers, all the initial gear for them to mentor, the gear to take home with them. That includes insurance, all the things.
Yeah.
So if any companies or anybody out there would like to sponsor a kid, we can definitely do that. Or if you have, a donation that you want to go to something specific, right? Like conservation or to, anything, we can kind of work with you to make sure that your money's spent how you want it to be spent.
Yeah, and I think that's really cool because, the first thing you think about is, I got to be a fly fishing company or an angler to be a participant or of a donation, et cetera. And reality is it's an outing, right? I mean, you could be a grocery store and donate lunches for the day, and that's a huge, huge thing, right?
Huge.
You could know a business owner and be at a party just talking to them, and it turns out, oh, you know what? You should look into this. I heard these guys on the podcast. It sounds awesome, et cetera. And it's somebody who never had an interest in fly fishing, but boy, what are they contributing to? So, fantastic for you guys. I mean, hats off for creating such an organized effort on a very specific thing. And it seems to be going well. I'm so proud because, when I heard the podcast 3 years ago, it was a lot of like, well, we're working on that. Yeah, we got some ideas around that. So it's really cool to hear you guys have come a ton of a way, and it's really kicking off. So great. So again, that's themayflyproject.com, right? And if you want to talk donations, it's you, Jess. And then the other aspect, Caitlin, is you, and that's like finding location and participation, correct?
Yeah. Or if you want to bring the Mayfly project to your community too, we can talk about that. We only start 5 projects a year, but we're always taking applications for new projects to serve more kids.
Very cool. All right. This is an awesome subject. We could talk about it all day long, but we are a fishing podcast, so we're going to talk some fishing. And
that sounds great.
Yeah, this is the dedicated nympher speaking here of it's great. But yeah, we're going to tell me a little bit about this, Jess. You got into tightline nymphing. How did that first start off for you?
Yeah, so wish I had some like romantic story, right? About how I got started into tightlining, but basically, I wanted to fish the Soquee in Georgia, and man, I was like, how do we get to fish this? The rod fees on there are pretty expensive, and I saw they were having a competition on the Soquee, and so I was like, man, that's what I, and so I taught my wife and Laura into fishing this comp, and the rules were like you had to be, you had to fish tightline style, right? Like you couldn't have indicators and all that stuff. So that's kind of my first introduction to it, right? Was just trying to like, get to fish the Soquee on the cheap.
Because it was like half price or something, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was like $150. You know what I mean? Like to enter the competition.
You're like, I could get a couple more nymphs out of this, some boneless hooks if I spent that money. Yeah, that's so awesome.
That's right.
All right, cool. So you packed up your box. You got I'm assuming you had your rules and stuff ahead of time, and did some strategery on getting ready. Head down there. Now, did you feel confident, or did you feel like I just got slaughtered? What am I doing?
Well, so oddly enough, the very first comp I fished in, like I felt confident going into it, you know what I mean? And then just got like railed, you know what I'm saying? Like just got absolute railed, which was, it was a good experience for me. I'm always down to learn. So, yeah, I just got slaughtered the very first comp. I ever fished in. So, it was a good learning experience, right? Humbling experience for sure.
Tell me a story about the drive home where you just like in your head, like, what was I doing? Like, God, how did he get 38 fish out of that hole? And God, I was just there.
Not really. Like, it was more of just like, there's so much more to learn. You know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong. I do have those days where I kind of like get down on myself, but like, for me, like if it gets handed, if I go and just get demolished on a river, like for me, it creates like a next step that I need to go to.
It's almost like you find the problem for the first time and you're like, ooh, there's a lot of cool stuff under that rock. I got to go get. Yeah.
Like,
very cool. Very
That's
cool.
right.
Did you spend a lot of time with your competitors learning, et cetera? Because I know that environment is supposedly really good for, cross-pollination, et cetera.
Yeah, like, some of the biggest leaps I've made in my personal fishing journey, right? I don't know if those are even real words or if I'm just making up sentences, but I've had a couple people like Josh Miller and Gordon Vanderpool who have kind of like taken me under their wing and really taught me a whole lot, like firsthand. So there's some great resources like online and books, right? Like Devin Olson has some great books out, and George Daniel does, and Josh is actually coming out with a book this coming spring, 2024. But honestly, like they've been super open and willing to help, and I feel like that's been the big difference in my personal fishing.
And those guys are part of the U.S. fly fishing team. They coach or mentor in a youth or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Josh was actually on the men's team for 2 cycles, and he's currently the head coach of Youth Fly Fishing Team USA. And then Gordon is the I can't remember if it's the East coach. I can't remember how the region they haven't broken down in, but Gordon's been a coach for the Youth Team USA for probably a decade or so. So they've both got great experience, a lot of experience on a lot of different water, right? And also, diagnosing problems with anglers, which there was a whole bunch with me, Josh likes to remind me of how terrible I was the first time.
He's like, here's another backpack, kid. You're going to need a lot of pills.
That's right. That's
too funny.
Well, and they just started doing clinics like Jess and, like I think that's another huge thing. If anybody can get to one of their clinics, like they'll go through everything with you. Like they'll teach you everything. They'll tell you what you're doing wrong. Like, I don't know, Jess, you guys have only done a few, but you're starting to do more, right, throughout the country.
Yeah. So we've been doing some clinics in like Montrose, Connecticut. We've done them in Oklahoma. And so we've been putting together basically your nymphing clinics, and it's a whole weekend, and you come in and we kind of teach you everything you need to know to get started. So, it's been a pretty cool experience, and also it's been great for me to like listen to Josh and Gordon teach. Right, so like there's a whole art form of like teaching. You know what I mean? Like it's one thing to be able to go out and catch fish, but it's another thing to be able to teach. Yep. You know what I mean? So it's been real good. I've kind of been like the organizer / cook. You know what I mean? But it's real good I feel like they've really helped me develop some teaching skills.
Organizer, cook. Well, we got to get you a hold of Camp Chef. They have the cooking stuff, man. It's some good stuff. It's awesome. They got this big griddle. I went on the Smith Fork in Montana this past year, and I got a big griddle, and it was like 15 guys, and I was like cooking breakfast and dinner for them, and it was like heaven.
Oh, cool.
It was so easy. Yeah. So I'll have to give you some tips.
That's awesome.
For sure.
Yeah, I'd love them.
That's awesome. But now, Caitlin, you picked up a lot of your tight line nymphing from Jess. So when you started and you were learning from Jess, what were some of the things that kind of gave you aha moments?
Yeah, well, at first I was like, this feels ridiculous. Like, this doesn't feel like it's going to work. But then I saw him like kicking my butt. Like I would just dry fly fish and he would just kick my butt all day long. So then I started asking questions and, I think the first thing, it's really hard to get that drift right, and so like it's really hard to learn new things when you're so used to doing some new things, or doing what you're successful at. And so to start sucking again at fly fishing was hard, like to start really sucking, and then being like, I finally had to tell myself, like, I will not bring a dry fly at all. I'm only going to tight line today. I even would tell Jess that. I'm like, I'm only going to tight line today. I'm going to suck. But I think the biggest thing that I got was just being able to fish with him and being able to actually watch him, and to approach different parts of the river, and him to teach me like how to fish those and to give me feedback and stuff. I think that's been the best. And sometimes, like, if I get my butt kicked, I'll just kind of like video the section that I got my butt kicked, and then I'll send it to Jess, or I'll even call him sometimes when I'm getting my butt kicked and say, what should I do here? And he's usually like, you need to slow down, Kate. He's like, you need to just like stay in that spot and like fish it. He gives me all the tips and stuff. So really just having a phone a friend is super helpful. But yeah, he's helped me so much to learn it. And yeah, there's always so much to learn with Tightline, but it's very rewarding and successful.
Josh, I'm curious to hear what you, if you agree with me in what you do in these scenarios. But one of the things that seems to have changed it for me was understanding like angles of attack on your casting. So if I have like a structure, like a log, but like changing my angle and being able to actually, instead of entering the water straight up and down, entering in an angle, or entering higher and letting the water carry it under the log and things like that. Do you experiment with that? I think the advice I always got was, if you're not losing flies, you're not in the right location. And I don't know how true that is or not, but it seems to work for me. So I'm curious to hear what you've learned.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like, kind of one thing that Gordon's always told me was to like stay fishy, right? And so sometimes I'll robot out, right? Like I'm a very like, okay, tell me to do something, I can do it, But yeah, I mean, changing the angle in which your flies enter the water, also changing your sighter angle, right? Like, from having a real, shallow angle to a deep angle, changes the depth of your flies. Also, like, understanding where your flies are in the water column is, I mean, that stuff just takes like a long time to learn, right? Like one of the guys, Paul Bork, who was the head Team USA coach for 5 or 6 years, and they won like 3 world championships under Paul. Like he always told me, he was like, man, if you're on a scale of 1 to 10 for tight lining, right? He's like, you can go from a 1 to a 5 in about 3 months, you know what I mean? And then from a 5 to a 7 in about a year, and then from a 7 to a 10, takes a lifetime, and you're going in like super small increments. Right. So, little things that you're doing, right, Christian? Like, you remember, 3 years ago, you caught fish doing this, and you're in somewhat of that same scenario. It's like coming and replaying that back, being like, I'm going to try this, so being able to have a bunch of different tools in your tool belt, is a good thing, and to kind of, go back, I've Caitlin's like an amazing fisherman. Like she mentioned dry fly fishing. Like I've learned a lot from Kate, on my dry fly game. Cause again, I get so dialed into like your own thing. It's like, I don't even know if I know how to cast a dry fly anymore. You know what I mean? Like, we get in that scenario, right? Like it happened to me, like 2 years ago. I was tight lining on the Little Red, and like there were these fish midging, right? And like, I could not, like I didn't have the setup. I didn't have the flies, I didn't have anything. I just got my teeth beat in, right? And so it's one of those things where I'm like calling Caitlin, I'm calling Gordon, I'm calling Josh. I'm like, well, okay, like I just got my teeth kicked in, so I need everybody to come together and like console me.
It's so funny you say that, because I can recall feeling like I was a really good dry fly angler, and then I started tight line nymphing, and I like just fell in love and was like, oh man, this is crazy, and got really proficient, and like for the first time really got micro detailed and studied really hard and tried a lot of different things and et cetera, and got proficient. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to go back to dry fly fishing. And I was like, oh my God, I suck. Like, this is horrible. Like, what am I doing? Like you could slap in the water, and, you got this weight forward line that just feels ultra heavy. And you go down the list of things that you're doing wrong. And you're like, man, why wasn't I paying any of this detail before? But in a long run, it made me a lot better, So really cool to experience that as well.
Mm-hmm.
You you talk about tight line nymphing. You talked about tight connection and stuff too, and I think you mentioned something about smaller flies, et cetera. When I first started, and when I help other people, I always tell them go with a really heavy point fly because you'll be able to feel that tension and feel the bottom. And the way I always present it to them is you want to get tight, feel the bottom, and then when you feel the bottom, like lift 3 inches and then try to drift from there. Is that the approach that you use with like learning, or have heard in the learning of like stay tight at the beginning because you can feel everything more and then try and learn the subtleties of lighter setups, et cetera? Or how has that gone about for you?
Yeah, I think especially like when you're teaching new people, starting out heavy is always a little bit easier, mainly because they can feel the flies, you can tell you're connected, and again, that's 3/4 of the battle is knowing that you're connected, right? So, like we're going to talk about later, like connection, equals strike detection, and they all of it plays together, right? Whether you're tight lining or whether you're fishing indicators, also too, you kind of know where you're at in the water column, right? Like, if you have this big 4 mil bead on, you know what I mean? Like, if you're on the bottom or not, because, those fish, contrary to what we've all been taught, growing up, right, it was like, oh yeah, you want to be ticking the bottom as you're nymphing, you know what I mean? And like those fish aren't necessarily sitting on the bottom. Like, you got to figure out what water column they're feeding in, right? Like, they may be feeding, they may be looking up and coming up, halfway through the water column to eat flies. They're not necessarily going to go down. I mean, they, and I've seen fish go down and eat stuff, right? But like for the most part, they're not going down to eat flies.
No, they're going left, right, or up.
It's, yep. It's easier to see, to tell where your flies are at when you're fishing heavy. And so, when you start to small down and fish smaller bugs, it just takes a little while to like kind of know where you're at and know where you're down enough and be confident enough to be like, I know that I'm getting good drifts through there. And so they're either there or they're not, So I think one thing that Kate and I try to do, like anytime we go anywhere or fish new water, like I always try to fish a different river, right? Like we went out to Colorado and we stay at this place. We do like this Mayfly project kind of retreat for our staff and stuff like that. And, our goal last time we were there, which was a couple months ago, like we fished a whole bunch of different rivers, right? Like we didn't fish the same place twice, and if Kate was catching them and I wasn't, I'd be like, Kate, what are you throwing? You know what I mean? And Kate's throwing like these green mops, and I'd be like, give me some of those mops, Kate. But so I think like fishing different rivers and also fishing with people who kind of get it, you can always learn stuff from whoever you're fishing with, right? And again, I like to surround myself with people that are smarter than me, which is why Caitlin's here, right? Like she's obviously smarter than me.
The brains of the organization, they say.
That's right.
Caitlin, I'm curious to hear some of your learning on casting and entry point. I know when you're Euro nymphing, one of the big mistakes, and I did this for a long time, is you cast and you end your cast high, but you really bring your tip down lower and you get this like pile cast and this loose leader, etc. I'm assuming Jess has really honed in on that for you. What have you learned from that?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake that I was thinking is like when I was fishing without Jess for a while, like I would pile my leader just to try and get my flies down faster, like thinking like, oh, and then I'll pull it up and have my indicator. And so once Jess kicked my butt on that, I quickly realized like, oh, I'm missing so many fish by, not connecting once I start, and so if I don't fish for a while and then I start fishing again, like I went fishing last Friday, it was the first time I had gone in like 4 weeks. The first thing I thought was like, oh crap, I've got to really focus on like my entry point and making sure that it's smooth and that it's not piling up, and so that I can be connected and drift all the way through. But I think that's the biggest thing. And Jess makes it look so dang easy. So sometimes I hate fishing with him because he makes it look so easy. But he also is great at like correcting me nicely and being like, okay, well, it looks like you're kind of slapping into the water there. And so, yeah, it's definitely helpful to fish with him.
Jess, what are some of the tricks that you use to keep tight on that entry point?
Yeah, so just like landing connected, right? Like so as you're coming in, like Kate was talking about, like, you know, you want to make sure you're landing connected and slowly like lowering your flies into the zone. Like that's something that helps keep connection, right? So like if you think about if you drop a fly in the water, right? Like it doesn't matter how swift it is or whatever, like that thing's going straight to the bottom.
Right.
Like it just is. You know what I mean? So like what's pulling your line downstream is your tippet, you know? And so like, you know, there's a big difference in using like 5X and using 7X, you know? And so, you know, being able to size your tippet down. And again, like, you know, if you know, pile up your leader when you're casting, like that water is going to grab that line and pull it downstream. So it's actually going to look like you're tight, but you're not.
Yeah, your bugs
you know
are
what I mean?
doing whatever under there to pull you tight.
Yeah, because, and like I said, it kind of looks like it's tight because you've had, you know, this parachute creates this parachute underneath the water, and that water's pulling your line down, so it looks tight, but it's not. You know what I mean? And so, just, you know, landing connected and slowly lowering your flies down is a great way to ensure that you have that connection.
Yeah, it's funny you were talking about tippet size, because my decision for this winter was I was only going to carry 7X tippet, because I was like, you know what, I need to know what the limits are of that tippet size. And so the more I fish it and the more I get better at playing and the more and more and more, it's like you just limit it there, because I think it was Lance Egan who had told me people argue about the size of their rods all the time. Like, oh, you're fishing a 3-weight? Like, how do you catch a big fish? And he's like, I'm fishing 6-7X tippet. That's my limiter. It's not a 3-weight. I could yard on anything that I want and break it. But he was just always about that. Like, yeah, you want to be thin, you want to get that drag off, etc. So very cool to hear you guys talk about that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
We make fun of Jess a lot because he's always got 8X on. And I'm like, what are you?
Yeah.
Or I'll fish whatever he has on, and then I'll break off like 3 times, and I'll be like, "What do you even have on here?" He's like 8X. I'm like, "What are you doing, man? You're killing me."
It's amazing the strength of him.
It really is.
Yeah, it is.
Like it really is. Like it's stronger than you think it is. You know, and also those rods that we're all fishing for tightline were made for that, right? Like, I mean, it's made to have that soft tip to be able to fight those fish. You know, but like this week we were at Dry Run, and which is a kid friendly stream here in Arkansas. It's only for kids, and that's where we took our kids for their last outing. And Case, my son, was tightlining up through there and just like wearing them out, right? And he was there's this dock. I mean, Kate's been there. There's this dock that's up high, and I had like 6X Trout Hunter on for him, and he was like hoisting them into the net, like 5 feet, like.
And they're flopping around and everything else, and you're like,
yeah, but he'd be like,
"You're lasting, huh? Okay." Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, but it's crazy how strong that stuff is, for sure.
Yeah,
you know, and a lot of times, like for me, like I got real frustrated. I went over and fished in North Carolina, and I was fishing a Thomas & Thomas 3-weight, like a 10/8 3-weight, and like I was fishing 8X, and I was like, I broke off, and I was like, dadgum, like what is going on? You know what I mean? Like my hook sets, and you know I was used to fishing 7, and so I kind of had it dialed down to what, you know, my hook set was supposed to be, and I picked up that I just got the 10/9 2-weight from Thomas & Thomas, and like I don't break off near as many as I did with that 3-weight. So sometimes like it's also your rod, you know what I mean? So kind of keep that in mind. You know what I mean? Like, you know, sometimes your rod can play into that.
And it's a combination of your rod and your muscle memory, like you said, right? Like you could probably still fish that 3-weight successfully, but your muscle memory is so tuned in to pulling harder that if you were a little lighter on it, you'd probably get just as good of a hook set, but it wouldn't be as hard of a pull. So there's so many variables and dynamics involved. It's like, it's always a learning mechanism. That's what I love about it, man, is you just go out and learn, get your butt kicked. And as my uncle's a military guy, and when I got sick, he said, you know, just put your head down and write your mother. That's what you do, because you got to do it. And I look at fly fishing like that some days when it's tough. It's like, just put your head down, think about it, try and do what you can do, and move on.
Yeah.
Take your lumps,
I love
per
it.
se. So let's do this. Let's
Yeah.
dive into the connection and strike indication point. We talked about that a little bit, but give me your overall, Jess, of like what you mean by connection and strike indication, and then maybe some of your tips for that.
Yeah. So Kate and I kind of talk about this all the time. We even talk about with our mentors, right? Like this is kind of like bulled over into, it doesn't matter if you're, fishing underneath an indicator or, you're fishing with your, tight line rod. Like you have to have connection, right? Like the connection is what shows you your strike, right? So like a lot of problems that we see with our mentors, right? And like also with our, even people that I'm guiding down here, like, they're fishing a thingamabobber that's like that big around, with size, 22 midges, right? And they're 6 foot apart. Like there's no way if a trout eats that you're seeing it, right? Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like for the most part, like you're still getting the bites. You're just not seeing it, right? Because there's not enough connection there. So like I got on the little red out of like a drift boat. It's not really, the little red it has some sections you can tight line on it, but for me, the big difference is, I'm fishing, underneath an indicator and I'm fishing a huge, like egg or Waltz worm or something like that, like in huge meaning like bead size, right? Like 3.5 millimeter or 4 millimeter. That way, like I know I'm connected to my indicator.
Right.
You know what I mean? So when I get that bite, our clients see it, and so, that definitely happens, with our mentors too, right? Like we were talking about it, Kate and I were with some of our mentors the other day. We're like, hey, like, a lot of times, like, you're getting bites, you're just not seeing them, and it could be with, you're not connected because of the size of your bead on your fly, or you have too much, tippet between your indicator and your fly. So, those two things kind of go hand in hand. So whether it's also with tight line, sometimes, you want to be super connected and sometimes you don't want to be as connected. You know what I mean? Like that you want to have like a little bit of slack in it, so the further out you're fishing, it's more of like a visual game, right? Like you see your shider jump. Well, you still have to have connection to see that bite. You know what I mean? So, I think you're constantly like riding this line of connection and strike detection to try to figure out what works the best, if that makes sense.
And it achieves different depths and speeds and all kinds of different things. I really take a liking to your description of the indicator size too, because a good friend of mine he's a phenomenal angler. His name's Chris Passage. He was a guide here in Utah for a long time, and we have a tailwater, and it's known for fishing very small bugs. Size 20 is like big, and so he wholeheartedly adapted fishing with a balloon indicator because of its sensitivity. And boy, when the first time I fished with him, I couldn't believe it. Like a strike just looks so different than anything else. It's got this almost like vibrating look to it. It's just different. I don't know how to describe it, but when you see it, it's different. And, it barely puts any air in it, etc. It is like a kite when you're casting it. It's okay. But the strike detection is so much higher. And same thing. The other day I went out and I used like the new thingamabobber type things. And like you said, I used the one that's like the size of a dime, not the one that's the size of a $50. Yeah, I can see it better, but gosh, you need jaws to pull that thing under.
Well, and that's kind of it too. I mean, you can offset it some with your flyweight. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, if you're fishing a super heavy bug, I mean, you'll be able to see him more. But like I said, you can't fish size 22 midges with a thingamabobber that's that big, or you won't see it. Or if you do see it, it's he's had it for a while.
Right.
If you do see it,
it was as much of a stuck in the mouth as an eat.
Right. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
No, you learn, like when I first started tightlining, I realized like how many fish I was actually missing, like using a bobber. I think that was the biggest thing, is like, oh my gosh, I've missed so many fish in my life by not tightlining and really being connected. And even when I fish with Jess, he'll go like, yep, like, and I'll just miss fish after fish. I'm like, really? That was a fish? He's like, yeah, that was definitely a fish. So I think the more you can learn to get tight and to just really be connected that way, the more fish you're going to catch too, which is mind blowing when you fish with a bobber forever and now you're you've missed so many.
I've also found too, one of the little tricks that I've done is instead of continuing my drift all the way through on my tight line and doing a hard snap at the end to reset my cast and whatnot, is if I'm having a particular difficult hole, but I'm like really confident there's fish in there, I'll slow reset in the middle of the run and get that rising. And it's amazing how many times you'll get a strike there where you do this like slow lift and you know you're going to bring it up to where you see your first bug, and then I'm going to snap and reset my cast. But like on the way up, you're like, oh, there's the eat, you know. It's really cool to see. I just love seeing it. It's something that has become really cool for me, a lot like dry fly fishing in some odd way. I know people are rolling over in their graves right now because I said that, but to each his own, I guess.
Just like dry fly fishing.
Yeah, it's just like it's the same thing. Well, cool, guys. It was really good having you on the show again, telling us a lot about how the Mayfly project has grown, become an absolutely complete success, especially for these kids and yourselves as well. I'm sure you've enjoyed the journey and learned so much from it. So congrats to you. Again, great having you on the show. A ton of learning on tight line, connection, etc. Caitlin, we'll have to get you back on sometime to talk dry fly, and then we'll handle all the purists and let them know what's up. But I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you guys soon, okay? Thank you.
Thanks, Christian.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Christian. Appreciate you.
Got it.